Is there a way that, so you have a younger artist who's maybe in their 20s and 30s, who's looking at the First World War, of which they have no, direct, let's say, umbilical ideal to.
Yeah, exactly.
So there's a generational gap of maybe 3 generations. So the work that they're looking at and the function that it has at large kind of fits into this notion of collective trauma and the way that we examine document as collective trauma, or the way that we use the function of, let's say, photography in this case, to examine these things. Do you feel within photography in particular, and this is probably a wider question about the medium itself that's been covered a little bit, but do you think that dealing with documents, photography in this sense, can actually give us any real insight into this notion of collective trauma, or is it more metaphorical? I mean, we're kind of looking at this through, the eyes of an artist, for example, as opposed to, in Chloe's case, as opposed to a war photographer. So how do we deal with these documents as evidence of collective trauma, or is that something that can't be really taken into consideration?
Okay, so that's a really complex question, but it's a really interesting one. I think one of the ways to break it down is that you have two kinds, there are many kinds, but there are essentially two different possibilities here. One is somebody researching and visiting and finding a subject, like Chloe. And then the other is somebody who's personally and or geographically implicated in the subject. So I think the difference is, the thing like the map, like Kawada, these kinds of things which are about a place where somebody is from, and an examination of the impact on a place of an event is much more likely to engage in what you're talking about. And I think some of the first things in the show, actually, they're about the First World War, about this sort of mass tourism episode at the end of the First World War. And you have this incredible album of images of the city of Reims, which are destroyed, very heavily bombed. And it's made by a local architect photographer, Pierre-Antoine Touré. I think that idea of somebody trying to document their own city that's just been destroyed, and trying to understand what's happened to their own, to their home, to the people, to the place that they know, to the people they know, that's a big difference between that and a photographer deciding that they would like to go somewhere and try and understand what's happened there. Not that one is more or less effective, but one of them may deal more or less with what you're talking about. And I think the work around Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan in the 60s was almost entirely a generation later. So it's like made between the late 50s and the mid 60s, so 15 to 20 years later than the event. But it shows an incredible sense of not only reflection on what had happened to that previous generation, but also the fact that it was still happening. So a lot of the motivation for those projects is that the war happened 15 or 20 years ago, but the people in Hiroshima and Nagasaki are still living it every day. They're still, the radiation sickness, the birth defects, the things that had happened meant that war hadn't finished when the peace broke out.